Welcome to the Breakthrough Moments podcast, a podcast where challenges meet opportunities. I'm Harald, and together with my co-host Lasse, we explore stories of innovators, leaders, professionals, and entrepreneurs, and how they turn obstacles into game-changing breakthroughs. Get ready for insights that inspire and lessons that last. Subscribe now, and let's dive into the moments that define success. Welcome to today's episode of the Breakthrough Moments podcast. We're excited to welcome Kristoffer Ryeng, a dynamic professional who has seamlessly blended the worlds of business consulting and education. With a rich background in business architecture, agility, and IT, Kristoffer has recently embarked on the challenging yet rewarding journey of starting his own company while teaching at Elevbakken High School. His unique insights into organizational structure, the importance of flexibility in business, and his innovative approach to value creation makes him a compelling guest. Join us as we explore Kristoffer's journey, the pivotal moments that have shaped his career, and his vision for the future of work. Welcome, Kristoffer. Nice to see you again.
Thank you.
So, for the people that don't know you, can you briefly describe who you are and what you do and what got you into that?
Yeah. I'm a privileged 40-year-old man. I'm married, 3 kids. I see myself as an open-minded technologist and engineer with a passion for developing people and organizations from within. I have a deep expertise in organizational agility, strategic change, and vocational IT education, applying and exploring alternative approaches like inner development goals and human design in my own life, and also looking how to take these into business and school, as well as more traditional techniques. So currently I work as a vocational high school teacher in IT, and I have my own business within facilitation and strategy coaching. So looking for leadership development and agility and how to build companies where people are engaged and have a high level of job satisfaction.
Yeah, very good. And we had a conversation before this, and you went a bit back and forth on the journey you had in your professional career, the career as a teacher, where you started, then you went back to it recently, and also the chapter that has begun in terms of starting your own company. Could you describe more in terms of like what made you make the decision to start your own company, and also how do you balance that with teaching and
Yeah, my primary motivation, I had a burnout. I've sort of had to do something differently. And as I said previously, I started looking into inner development goals and human design and techniques that helped me personally. And I wanted to use these techniques and these methods and tooling for helping others as well. Also, I have been working with vocational IT for a decade. I was the initiator. I was the guy who actually came up with the idea to make some major changes in the vocational IT education structure in Norway, and have been working with this along with working in the IT industry for the last 7 years. I have a desire to actually complete my mission with this. There are some small issues really, but crucial ones for actually fulfilling the mission or making it work. In particular, regarding the connection between the IT industry and the school and how they can get into work afterwards and how they look at it. Because the IT industry doesn't have any long traditions for apprenticeships like carpenters or like electricians or whatever. It's sort of my purpose or my mission to actually make them understand the value of apprenticeship. Obviously, starting in a new job in parallel with starting my own consultancy is challenging, but it's also rewarding. And I have just started, so I can't conclude yet how difficult this will be. But obviously, time and energy is an issue, also regarding my burnout experiences. So I know I need to be careful and I need to be wise when balancing this.
Yeah, I resonate with the fact about burnout because I've also experienced that in the past. And I think a lot of the listeners who are in the, let's say, the existing entrepreneur or ambitious professional category would also say like, okay, I've either been very, very close or already have experienced it. You mentioned that there hasn't traditionally been any apprenticeships in the IT world. Um, what do you think is the reason for that? Like in comparison to more traditional brick and mortar like plumbers, electricians, carpenters.
Mostly, I think it's because there hasn't been any education. This is the project that I initiated 12 years ago was actually the first time we got not apprentices within IT. We have had apprentices in IT operations and also IT support, but within IT development and programmers, there has been no alternatives. You couldn't actually get those from the high school level. So the colleges and universities have had monopoly on training those. But that means you take quite a long time to actually become a programmer. Quite a lot of the really good programmers in the industry today started before there were any kind of education at all, or they have only been self-trained. And I believe that programming in particular, and also other parts of IT development, is more a craftsmanship than a
Mm.
highly theoretical study. So you need to be a good craftsman and to understand the craft of programming. And that's done by working with programming and not teaching programming and in high schools or in colleges and universities in higher
Yeah,
education.
yeah, it makes sense. It's it's been looked at differently. The growth spurt in terms of how it came to be has been differently in terms of the more traditional crafts. That makes sense. When we spoke last, you went into great detail about all of the things that you've done prior to the burnout, or what you've been working with in your professional career as well, in terms of uh, mergers, IT, architecture, and those topics. And you mentioned kind of like how businesses have to work with business architecture and agility. And how do you see these concepts play a role in success in business? Either it's be a startup or established company. What's your take on that?
First of all, I think agility is not a goal in itself.
Mm.
It's a means, and it's a means to stay relevant during rapid change and to create better results. So it's really important to state that in the beginning, it, agility in itself is not the goal. Um, and most startups are really agile by default, but it becomes difficult when they start to scale and start to grow. And uh, quite often, I see that new companies or startups or growing companies, they tend to seek traditional structures because they hire people who have been doing that before. It could be 5 years ago, or 10 years ago, or 20 years ago, but they have done it before, and they have they tend to think that that's a requirement for growing, that you have to build these structures. But I don't think that it's absolutely necessary. You need some kind of structure, but you don't need these traditional hierarchies that are sort of the main structure in most large companies. You need to plan your scaling and growth to remain agile, to be actually keep your adaptability, to keep your ability to make changes rapidly and frequently.
Mm.
And when established companies need to become agile, actually a much more difficult task to do because all people who have started stretching in their 30s know it's that hard. To actually if you haven't been agile, it's much more difficult to become agile.
Mm.
So I think startups and scale-ups have a huge advantage there. But they need to really keep this desire to remain agile.
That's very interesting because a lot of what I do separate to this podcast in our company is we're working with a lot of these aspiring entrepreneurs that are getting into start creating their own startup. If you were to kind of give them one advice when it comes to this architectural structure in terms of how they structure the company, how they make ready for when they achieve the growth, but also how do they adopt when they grow, like what would that one advice be?
I would say organize around missions, create cross-functional autonomous teams, like the startups really are, for each mission, and keep each mission simple enough that you could keep these teams small enough. Then you need to have certain principles and guardrails to watch over your autonomy, because uh, you need some frames, some guardrails for autonomy without any kind of limits or that then you get anarchy. We don't want that.
Mm.
Um, and obviously you will have some company core values. You have a company, you have this main problem you are solving. You maybe have some vision. Obviously, should be the same for everyone in even in a growing company. And then you have some kind of services that you really don't. You need them in a company, no matter how small or big. But if you don't want to experiment with those, like payroll services and also security should be more or less standardized to a certain level at least. So you need some kind of guardrails to watch over your autonomy for your teams. And if you want to go outside these, you will need to have a really good explanation. Further on, then it's emphasizing that you need curiosity. You want an organization that is willing to learn and experiment, because that's the crucial thing to actually keep agile. And you need to make it safe to fail and learn from failing. And um, many organizations create structures to avoid failing, and that's not ideal, because you really want people to fail, but you also want them to learn from their mistakes.
Yeah.
So
And yeah, go ahead.
yeah, and they, to do so, to make it actually safe to fail, you as a leader or you as the group in the startup, which is typically the leaders of the scaling company, you need to actually know your people, and on a
Mm.
really deep level, you need to understand them and trust them. You need to actually go deep, and deeper than I think most leaders actually do.
Yeah. Yeah. I, I resonate with that in terms of learning. As like I believe, and I think I've had the tendency from a young age, being privileged of learning that from my dad, was stay curious. Like you need to continuously learn new things. Like be like a sponge. Like try to uh, learn as much as you can because that is gonna open doors. Hence a bit of why we have this podcast as well in terms of like figuring out how we can overcome challenges and sharing those stories. And that brings me to kind of like your breakthrough moments. You mentioned a few of them, and but could you share kind of like when you had kind of like your breakthrough moment, your aha, when you realized the importance of what you've been speaking about so far, which has been organizational structure and how that is fostering, let's say, an innovative culture or an agile way of doing things.
Yeah, it was quite hard actually to find one particular breakthrough moment, but I was mind blown when I read the book Team of Teams by General
Mm.
McChrystal about how the U.S. Special Forces in Iraq transformed during their fight against Al Qaeda in Iraq. And this is a military organization, no particular technology in such case, but reading about how they had to transform because they met an enemy that they weren't they didn't really know anything about this enemy, how it was organized, how it was structured. They was in a not known territory, so they didn't have the advantage of actually knowing all the demography and how the geography in the area was. So they needed to be able to learn because they realized that their way of doing missions that had been a machine. They have really optimized this for doing things in a known situation, but it didn't work. They were outperformed by guerrilla soldiers without training and AK-47, and they shouldn't really be any issues with fighting these people, but they were outperformed on the battlefield. So the general mentions lots of things, but most of all, it had to do with decision making, how we actually make decisions, and who are actually making the decisions when you're out there, because you can't, when you're in fight, you can't ask your general for how should I be doing this and how should I be doing that. You need people out in the battlefield able, having the authority to actually make those decisions, because they are there, they have all the information, they know how things are going on, and they need the autonomy to actually go on. Reading that book was really breakthrough, because that made me understand that agility was not only for IT. It was this can be purposed for all kinds of organizations, and whenever you have some kind of complex problem solving, you have problems you don't know how to actually get there, then you need agility. You need to be able to experiment. You need to be able to learn. You need to be able to adapt. And creating these organizations is crucial.
Yeah, that's interesting. How did this experience kind of change your approach to the work that you did and are doing currently?
Yeah, it changed how I want, or where in the organization I wanted to work, because until then I had been working a lot with IT and IT organization, but I realized that to actually be able to change these decision-making structures, you needed to go outside the IT organization. You need to go even further, and you need to work with the entire system that an organization is. And to be able to, I think that agility, the hardest part for agility when it comes to slowing down and stiffening agility in most organizations is the financial department, the chief financial officer. Because when it comes to money, most people or most organizations tend to be really careful, and they don't want to do this. And you, a CEO or a CFO, or preferably both, that are willing to go of financial control in the traditional matter, and accepting that the world is not predictable. And that's not in the nature of most CFOs.
Absolutely not. That would be a completely game changer if they were. Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's interesting. And that's a completely new type. Like CEOs and CFOs letting go of control of the finance to some degree at least.
To some degree, obviously, yeah.
Yeah. Because some things can't be controlled or like seen ahead of time.
Yeah, and I think that's a major point. It's sort of a flawed assumption in many educations and even organizations as well, and in the traditional structures, is that the world is predictable. So that's one thing. And also these hierarchical structures used in, I would say, almost any organization, both in private and public sector, assume that also the decision makers are actually the best qualified for making those decisions, when in most cases they are not. Because in so many cases, in particular when it comes to complex problem solving, we have never done this before. There aren't anyone who actually knows how to do this, how much this will cost, etc. Why should one single CFO or CIO or CEO be able to actually see the entire picture? So again, when coming to the financial questions, the question is not how much will it cost. The question should be how much are we willing to pay?
Mm.
How much can we afford to figure out whether this is an acceptable way of approaching, and if it doesn't succeed, how much are we actually willing to risk losing money before we push the emergency brake and say, okay, we can't go further. So you need to change the mindset, in particular in the financial department, because obviously that's important for many companies.
Yeah. So it's a combination of changing the mindset, as well as creating these, to some degree, predefined rules in terms of how much are we willing to pay or invest into figuring out a specific specific thing, and combining that with, let's say, a stop loss. Like, we can invest up this amount. If we can't see any result, then we're going to pull the brakes. And where the people that, or the person or the people that traditionally have been in the decision-making role, that they communicate with all of the people around them together to have this kind of like this dynamic decision-making process.
Yeah, that's correct. And in traditional companies, you have some kind of promise that, okay, we will spend this and we will get this kind of value in return on investment. But when you're solving problems that nobody has ever solved before, you can't know. It's impossible to actually know that you will even get some return on the investment. You have some kind of probability that, okay, it's likely that we will get here, but you need to take a different approach. You need to set shorter time horizons, shorter deadlines, and okay, we are willing to fund this until this date, and then we will see how far have we come and take the decision: will we go further or will we stop? And then you can set a new date when you're getting there, because then you have learned more, you have more information, etc. So you need a different approach, and in particular, when scaling a business, when you are building something that has never been done before, like most startups or many startups and scale-ups are actually doing. That's the thing that they are doing. Then you need this approach to finance and also to many other decisions in your organization.
Yeah. So instead of just one big lump sum, one big project, it could be broken down into more incremental steps, like this smaller investment into trying to figure out X, then another one to figure out Y, and then a third one to figure out Z. And then making the decision, should we continue from here, making another small step or not. And that makes a lot of sense. One of the things that you mentioned, which I wanted to go more into now, was one of the things that you've experienced is the clashing of multiple larger, rigid organizations with a set defined structure in the IT mergers that you've been part of. How has this kind of like shaped the understanding of how you see business architecture, being lean, staying innovative, and all the things that you mentioned so far?
Yeah, I think that the major issue or the major challenge during these mergers and even within huge organizations as well is the leadership and culture. How actually leadership is being done, and that shapes how the culture is being perceived by the people in the organization. And most organizations have, and during a merger, look into these culture aspects. And I think that many of the leaders are, they are so busy making all these practical things within a merger that they overlook the culture dimension. And also the fact that in mergers, when you go from 30 to 60 or 60 to 100 or 100 to 200 people, you are actually changing a lot more. It's much more difficult to be a leader in an organization with 60 employees than 30. Many of these people only have experience leading companies with 30 people, and taking two leaders having experience of leading companies with 30 people each and putting them together doesn't make them good leaders for a company of 50 or 100 people. Uh, that has been really an issue in these companies, and I've seen it elsewhere as well. And I think one of the key things here is the willingness for those leaders to actually reflect on how they are doing themselves, how they are actually practicing leadership, how they are able to go into things. I've experienced that they have been wanting to make things up before presenting it to the people in the organization. And I think many of those cultural issues also could have been solved if they had just been open. Okay, we are struggling with this. We are open. We are willing. We need input on how we can solve these things and these things and these things. Swallowing their pride and saying we really don't know. We are newbies on this as well because we have experience, maybe 20 or 30 years of experience leading these small companies, but this is a new thing and we need to learn as well. But it's a hard thing to admit for many people, and in particular those in leadership positions that honestly I don't know. I haven't got a clue on how I should do this, and then reaching out for expert help, coaching. I think many of these issues could have been solved much more easily if they had been willing both to the organization and being honest and open with them, but also getting external specialists on this.
Yeah, that's interesting. I had an interesting call with a gentleman called Jean Michel, and he has run a company that creates children books. And the book publishing industry has changed a lot since they started back in 2007. Like you
Yeah.
had the iPads, the iPhone, all of these things that are coming around, and they've been kind of like experiencing a challenge in terms of decline. And it's interesting how you say like being transparent actually as a leader could be one of the greatest strengths in the merging of cultures in, for example, the IT examples that you've gone through. Because that is how they saw things. They went through and was completely transparent. And I believe that often leaders being that transparent, just saying, hey, we are struggling. We don't know how to solve this. It's a bit hit their ego. It's difficult to say, but what Jean-Michel and they experienced was that transparency was respected, and the people around him were looking for him to help them. So it's a very interesting take because I've heard someone say that and talk about the importance of transparency on multiple occurrences, and this is just another example of how that can actually be done in practice.
Yeah, and
Yeah,
I think that these traditional leaders, it represents some kind of masculinity. Men traditionally have been wanting to solve things on their own. It's hard to ask for help, and we would encourage them to find their feminine energy, and more feminine side is easier for women to ask. And I don't think it shouldn't be these stereotypes of that men and women are different. I think all men have these feminine energies and feminine sides, and they are able to bring them up if required. Traditionally, it hasn't been encouraged, and it has been regarded as weak leadership. But I really think that we are in a major paradigm shift now, where we need this balance between the masculine and feminine energy within leadership in particular, but in life in general, actually. So we need to sometimes we need to tend more to the masculine side, and other times we tend to need more to the feminine side, and to have this a good balance between those.
For the people listening and watching this that maybe are not that familiar with the definitions between the masculine and the feminine, kind of like if you were to give like a very short description of the ones.
Yeah, these are traditional terms from psychology, actually, and I really don't like the masculine and feminine because there are some stigmas connected to them. But the masculine energies are typically we need structures, we need to be have short, commanding, more ordering type of leadership, while the feminine energy within leadership is more about um, caring and nurturing and much softer. We could call them soft skills. Simon Sinek called them human skills because we all have them and we all need them. Traditionally, we have seen it more on the mother side or the women, but I think it's crucial to actually be able to balance both of these sides. And I find it interesting that many of the really huge companies in the US, we see that they are now led by Indians, people coming from India, like Microsoft CEO Satya Nadella. And I think the reason that these companies are so successful and they are actually able to progress in and be so successful in quite changing times is that the fact that there are Indians on top is that in the Indian culture, I think they are more able to balance this. It's more in their nature, you would say, or in their culture to do it. So that's a hypothesis from my side. I have no real evidence, but it's an observation.
Yeah. I truly believe that for us to be able to bring out the best potential that there is, that we need to have this balance between a catering and caring side and also more commanding, more direction, action, hard on and push through, which is the balance, at least how I also see the definition of the feminine and the masculine. One of the things that we are facing today is that we're facing a technological innovation at a grand and a scale that that is unprecedented. The entry of generative AI has changed the landscape a lot since 2022. Like, how do you see these technologies and new technology playing a role in helping companies scale their operations without actually sacrificing that flexibility and staying responsive and staying innovative and also catering and for that, let's say, the caring culture?
I would say that technology is a crucial part in all kind of companies, all kind of business models in the future, and mostly that has to do with we need technology to redefine how we create value. We need to find other ways of looking on the concept of value today, or in inheritance from the production industry and the industrial revolution. We have a linear connection between time consumption and value creation. If you double your time, you double your value creation. And in many cases, also when we have people working with other people, that's I trade my time for money. But if we want to be able to actually scale our operations, we need technology so we can increase our revenue without increasing our time consumption in the same proportion. So I think that's a crucial thing, and technology is how we can be able to do it.
Yeah. And you mentioned you mentioned an example of how a particular company detached their time effort from the value they created. Could you care explaining that example?
Yeah, it's quite an interesting. Most of us might have heard of as a service, as a concept for selling our services. But one company who has been doing this for quite a long time actually is Rolls-Royce with their airplane engine. They have been selling operational hours or minutes. So rather than selling an engine and then invoicing for the actually time consumed for service operations and afterwards, they own the engine themselves. They would rent it to the airlines or the manufacturers of the plane, but they are invoicing per minute that the engine is actually in the air. So that moves the incentive for making this engine stable and working. To the Rolls-Royce would then improve the spare parts. They would reduce the time needed to actually change those parts, increase the service intervals and everything, because that will increase the time that this plane could use this engine in air, which is an advantage for Rolls-Royce. They need to spend less time on actually fixing the engine when it's broke, and it's an advantage for the air companies because the higher quality of the product and the more money Rolls-Royce makes also means that the plane's in the air, and that's a good thing for the.
I remember when you told me this, I was like, one, I never heard about that. And secondly, it's a very interesting model, like a airplane engine as a service. But I
Yeah.
think it all goes down to, just from my understanding from when you told me the first and research I've done since, that the very important matter is that new technology now enables us to look at how do we structure the business model to have the incentive in the right place instead of what's just been traditional. What are we used to?
Mm.
Instead of just selling
Yeah.
that engine off, it's how can we structure the incentive for the end user to get the most value out of
Mm.
it? Hence, recreating or reshaping the dynamic of value creation. I think that is
Yeah.
very, very fascinating.
Yeah, and for the sake of Rolls-Royce, obviously they want to add more technology into these engines so they can have sensors and being able to measure anomalies when in the operations of the engine. So they can actually change the parts that are broke and or
Mm.
in the end of their lifetime, and not just guesstimate on okay, this part is estimated to be able to last for 5 years, so we change it every 5 years anyway, which has been the traditional way of doing it, but with new technology and more sensors, a better understanding of how this actually works. Some parts could be changed after 6 years or 7 years because
Mhm.
we know they are actually working. They are actually good enough still. And then we can have thresholds so we can say, okay, but now we see there are some ruptures or something in these parts that now we need to change this. And maybe even before it has gone
Mhm.
5 years because there has been some defect somewhere. And then you
Yeah.
could use these data to actually improve the manufacturing process. Technology plays a crucial part in these things because you need data, you need to be able to understand the situation, you need to be able to navigate more agile in how these things are working. Uh, and yeah, you can't do it without technology.
Yeah. You are now entering a interesting, let's say, chapter because you started your own company and you're in that process. And having been consulting in IT for a while, and also your experience as a teacher, an educator, like how has the experience you've had from education shaped the career, and how have you done consulting and the work that you've done in IT and also in respect to business development, for example, in the mergers and the things that you've been doing up until now before you started your own business?
I think that most of the experience I have had from teaching, we have actually been working in cross-functional teams, even before I knew that that was the term or that was how we did. And I've also seen and I'm experiencing now at Elvebakken that many teams of teachers are working really agile, actually. So they have found natural ways of collaborating that make sense for them, giving good results. That is the way we want to do it in the industry as well.
Mm.
So I've lots of things that I've learned. Okay, this is the way we should do. This is the way we want to go, and we'd like to go in this direction. In school, we have already been doing it for quite a long time. So and that has made me reflect on how have they been doing it? How have they been implementing these principles or this mindset and so on? And for me, in particular, two parts. The one thing is they have school is should be obviously a learning organization. They are willing to learn and they are willing to adapt and we have I suspect we have okay, we're turning this back around and starting on the new school year as we did the last one, but most teachers don't do that. That's a myth, I would say, or it might have been like that for 20 years ago, but I haven't seen many of those teachers. Teachers are learning, they are willing to adapt, they experiment, they try new things, and then stop and reflect. Okay, is this working? Is it not? Why not? So the fact that that schools are learning organizations is a big thing that I would take into in the industry as well, and also that the most important thing we can do whenever we are going to do any change of any kind, don't stop thinking on your own or tenke sjæl, as we would say in Norway. Because any framework, any recipe you would get to anything is only a way that works somewhere else, but it doesn't mean it necessarily works in your organization.
Mm.
And
That's powerful.
so you need to have this reflection process. You need to actually stop and think, is this really working? Why? Why not? And I would say that maybe it would be the major, if any organization should implement agile or want to be more, become more, or improve their practice in any way, it should be start with taking time for reflection regularly. Whether it's once a month, once a week, twice a year, whatever, but set aside time for actually reflecting on how are we doing things? Is it working? Why? Why not? If you could start with such a practice, most organizations would improve within quite a short time, because many organizations don't actually do this, and it's quite strange actually, because it's not very difficult, or it's not it's not magic in any kind. It's just stopping up, taking half an hour, whatever, and yeah.
Just asking the questions. I really like that, because I remember I've had this mentor for 5 years now, a very senior C-suite guy, and he asked the question that toddlers often ask, which is why? And the importance of asking the question why is typically something like we feel like it might be a bit shallow, but actually asking the question why and then asking the question why again and using it, which has been coined the Toyota way, which is asking why 5 times. I think really is a very powerful exercise to do and reflection to do, because it's often we don't even think why we're doing something. And often just by taking that, let's say half an hour a month to ask those questions could be really, really powerful. So I really like that. Looking ahead, Was you embarked on the journey now to build your own thing. Like, what do you see, given your experience and what you're focusing on for going forward? What do you see to be the biggest challenge moving forward in your business and taking that leap?
Yeah, having been through a burnout a couple of times and now being a solopreneur, I think obviously protecting my time and my energy is a crucial thing, and it will be difficult. And also balancing between my two jobs because
Mm.
the teaching, it's no limit how much time I could use on preparing education or preparing my lessons. But luckily there are synergies, so I can um, do things with my students, which is practicing things I would do in in my consultancy and vice versa. So I could be doing both more or less simultaneously to be able to actually protect my time and my energy, and particularly my energy. I mentioned human design and to live more aligned with it, and meaning more rest, meditating more, not initiating, and rather waiting for invitations from others instead. So, and goal for myself is to actually practice saying no more and be able to say,
Mm.
okay, I won't be doing this. And yeah, I suppose we might not have time to dig into human design right now, but that was a huge revelation in understanding myself and how I work as an individual. And so the main goals is to be able to balance, obviously, and then create more passive income through my company, not necessarily actually have to work for creating every penny, and through that be able to enable others to create positive change in the world, and that's both with my students and also the people I'm working with in my company.
Yeah, really like that. The balancing act between staying aligned to what you need as a human being, staying afloat and not getting burnt out, while taking all of the experience that you have from teaching to consulting, and from IT and there's mergers and all these things that you mentioned, which has been really inspirational, to create something that is worthwhile and having a positive impact. I really like
Mm.
that. The last thing that I often end these podcast episodes with, or that I like to end this with, is which I briefly described to you before we started the recording, uh, is has there been a question that you've been thinking a lot about, or a question that you would like to have answered, which it could be like a philosophical question for the ones that listen to and watches this episode, that could be a good question for afterthought. If so, what would that
Mm.
question be?
Yeah, um, that was actually a hard one preparing, but I've been wondering in how good role models are leaders when it comes to practicing self-love and looking inward, and how those leaders who are actually doing it, how open are they to their organizations and how they're actually taking it to their organizations. I know that there are someone who are doing it, and I've seen more and more examples of it recently. But I'm wondering whether this is quite ordinary practice, but people are not talking about it, or is this actually something that not so many are doing? That's an open question, at least for reflection for the audience, and hopefully the next guest will be able to give some kind of advice. I don't know. It
Yeah,
would be nice to know more.
yeah, that's amazing. The last thing is if someone wants to contact you, get in touch, read more about you, where can I find you, Kristoffer?
The best place would be LinkedIn, obviously, on Kristoffer Ryeng there. Just search for me. And I also have a company webpage, kristofferryeng.one, where I also have a blog where I've been publishing quite a lot of articles I've been writing previously, and I will publish my new articles there as well. So if you want want to learn more about how I do things and how I think on things, that's a good place to read because you have a complete collection, at least after a while. So it's not complete yet, but it will be within a few weeks.
Yeah, perfect. Just perfect. Kristoffer, it's been a pleasure. It's been an inspiring story. I hope the listeners and watchers also see that. And thank you for coming on the podcast.
Thank you for inviting. It has been a pleasure being here as well.